we learned about DNA structure being that of a double helix, and we talked about how DNA replicates. We talked about the process of transcription and the process of translation. So now we're just going to look at how genes are passed on and what genes are. So genetics is the study of heredity. A scientist by the name of Gregor Mendel came up with some laws that relate to genetics. And he's really considered the founder of genetics. And he actually studied pea plants. And he noticed that when he crossed plants of different heights, sometimes the offspring of those plants are different types of crosses. The first cross is the cross of purebreds, or true breeding cross. Traits that we have. We get two forms of each gene, because we get half of our genes come from our mother and half of our genes from our father. Half of your DNA comes from your mother and half of your DNA comes from your father. So for every trait, there are at least two forms of the gene. Okay, so we're going to just look at an example, and we're going to think of the pea plants that Mendel crossed. And we're going to indicate their characteristics by using letters. So we're going to look at tall plants versus short plants. So tall and short. To indicate genes, we're going to use letters for the genes. So big T indicates tall. That's a tall gene. Little t, lowercase t, is going to indicate the short gene. Tall is indicated with a big T, short, lowercase t. Now remember, every trait has at least two forms of a gene, because you get those two forms from your mother and your father. So for example, if this is a cell from mom, so this is an egg cell, also called an oocyte. Go oocyte, two O's, cyte, cell. And they're going to say this is sperm, this is dad. Okay, so I think we're going to say these are plants now. So let's say when these come, so let's say the father had the gene for short, mother had a gene for tall. During fertilization, which happens when egg and sperm come together to form a zygote, which is a fertilized egg. So zygote is a fertilized egg. So when they come together, this big T and this little t, the offspring has one of each. So this is why you have two versions of genes. So if we're looking at plants, tall plants are going to have two versions of genes. So tall plants to be a tall plant, they have to have two genes. They can have two big T's. So two big T's is tall. They can also have a big T and a little t. because the big T is dominant. So this is the one that's going to show up. The plant would still be tall because it has a dominant gene. It has a big T. So these two plants are both tall. Okay? And notice there's two letters. So two forms of genes. The big one indicates tall, the little t indicates short. These forms of the gene are called alleles. So alleles are forms of a gene. Right? And we're going to have all traits are going to have two alleles, minimum. They're going to have one from mother, one from father. For a trait, for every trait, you're going to have at least two forms of the gene. Okay, one comes from mother, one comes from father. Those forms of the genes are alleles. So here we have an allele from the mother, here we have an allele from the father, and this is what it looks like. Big T, big T. What does this indicate? So we're looking at, this is one allele or form of a gene for tall. This is another one for tall. So this plant will be tall. Okay? We also have this form. So big T for tall, little t for short. However, big T is dominant. So this plant will also be tall. Then we have little t, short, an allele for being short, allele for being short. So this plant is short. Now how do we get these combinations? This goes back to fertilization. So if we're looking at the trait of height, being tall and being short, we're looking at pea plants. In humans, there's a lot more genes involved than just one, all right? So many genes involved in human height. But in the pea plants, it was determined that it was just one gene. And here are our two genes. One's going to have to come from mother, one from father. We could get a big T from mother and a big T from father. Or we can get a big T from mother, a little t from father. Or we can get a little t from mother and a big T from father. Or we can get a little t from mother and a little t from father. So those are all the possible combinations if I've got these two forms of the genes. Now, these two are really the same thing. We always write the one with the uppercase letter first, but these are the same. Big T, big T. The same thing, just say one of each gene. So those are the same. So really, we're looking at three possible combinations here, and there they are. Now, if we have two of the same allele, there's a word we use for this. This is called homozygous. Homozygous means you have two of the same alleles. So you either have two dominant or two that aren't dominant. Going back to the plants, big T, that's homozygous because of the same, homozygous. Zygote is fertilized egg. Homo means same. Little t. So these are examples of homozygous. These individuals are homozygous. If you have one big T, one little t, they're not the same. So those are called heterozygous. So heterozygous, you have two different alleles. So for example, big T, little t. This is heterozygous. Hetero means different. Okay, homo means same. So heterozygous, you have one of each. So in this plant, you'd have One gene for being tall, one gene for being short. Sometimes the homozygous individuals are called purebreds, right? Because they have the same alleles. And sometimes heterozygous individuals are called hybrids because they have one of each. When we look at different generations of plants, let's say, the first generation is called the parental generation. Those are the parents, which is called a P generation for parents. And the P generation is going to include homozygous parents.